if we are looking at a project and we think it needs $1.1 million worth of capital, we'll implement that at the start of the project. It's just so much safer.
You are listening to the Property Developer Podcast, your home for tips, ideas and inspiration to help take your developing to the next level. Now here's your host, Justin Getty.
Hello and welcome to episode 84 of the show. Thanks for joining me. How are you doing? I'm well, although I have to say it's a weird time in Melbourne at the moment. We're still in lockdown. There's been tradies protesting in the streets. The state government has shut down the building industry. And this week we even had an earthquake. I mean, WTF. Anyway, I'm doing okay and trying to keep things moving along. I've been making some steady, if not slow, progress on my development project. We were actually due to finish in 2 days' time. But then the industry got shut down and all work has stopped, which is obviously very frustrating, to put it politely. We've actually finished about half of the townhouses and received occupancy permits for all of them, but we still need to formally complete the remaining ones, which only have some slight things to finish, like paint touch-ups and some caulking and some minor landscaping. I've actually got the statement of compliance done, and today we got the titles back, which is normally a pretty exciting time because it means in 14 days you can book settlements in and start getting paid. But because the site's closed, we actually don't know when the settlements are going to take place. There's also one final unit that I still have available that I need to sell, but I can't get access to that yet. So it's probably a few weeks away till I can get that back on the market. So it's a strange time on that project. If you want to check out what it looks like, have a look at the show's Facebook and Instagram pages and you'll see what the almost finished site looks like. I think it looks pretty awesome, but go and check it out and see what you think. We're so very close to finishing after all these years and all the ups and downs on this project, but I guess I should have known that there would be one final hiccup towards the end. But hopefully we're not too far off being completely finished there. On my other project, I finally got my plans endorsed by the local council. Took a lot of pushing and cajoling, but I finally got it done. And I'm now working on finalising all the documentation that's required to get the building permit. And then getting everything set for construction to get started. It's also been pretty slow going on this project in order to get things out of the ground, but hopefully once building gets started, things stick to schedule and go fairly smoothly. On a more positive note, the uptake of the property developer training continues to be amazing. I'm really blown away, and thank you once again to all the people that have joined up. It's been very humbling and gratifying that you have opted into the course. So thank you very much. If you are interested in learning the fundamentals of property development in your own time and at your own pace, then be sure to head over to www.propertydevelopertraining.com and take a look at what's available. I take you step by step through the development process so you know exactly what you need to do to find a site, run a feasibility, and complete a small-scale property development project, be that a duplex or a 3 or 4 unit site. So be sure to check that out. Or if you just want to get an idea about how ready you might be to become a property developer, then take the property developer quiz. It's at www.propertydevelopertraining.com/quiz. Now, if you want to stay up to date with what's happening on my projects, be sure to check out the show's Instagram and Facebook feeds for regular video updates and other things that catch my eye. Search for the handle of Property Developer Podcast. And don't forget, there is a rich archive of past episodes if you want to go back and take a listen to all my past guests. And there's some absolute crackers in the vault. I was thinking the other day of my chat with former Victorian Premier and trained architect Ted Ballew in episode 73 and how we talked about the decay and disappointment of the planning system and I can certainly say I've had some disappointment with the planning system over the last few months. So that chat is definitely worth a listen. And all the past episodes of the show can be found at propertydeveloperpodcast.com or on your favourite podcast app. Okay, on to today's guest, Matthew Chamberlain from Chamberlain Property. Matt has been doing small-scale property developments across Melbourne for a number of years now and shares some great lessons that he's picked up from completing more than a dozen projects. We cover the importance of research and understanding the local market that you're working in so that you can prepare a great feasibility, how resilience is something that's really helped Matt get through the many challenges he's faced over the years, and how his business probably grew too quickly in the first couple of years. Keep an ear out for how Matt likes to shape his feasibilities and the key metric he looks at to ensure his land cost is not too high. I think you will enjoy this conversation as much as I did, so let's kick things off by finding out what Matthew's favourite meal is.
It's a very easy one for me, mate. That's steak every day of the week. Simple man.
Yeah, you certainly look like a meat and potatoes kind of guy.
I am.
How do you like to eat your steak?
Medium rare.
Yeah, and what cut?
I like porterhouse. Yeah.
No
porterhouse,
sauce?
Bearnaise sauce. You can't really get much better in life.
Yes, and what kind of sides do you opt for?
No sides required, mate. Just the steak.
Just pure protein.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to finally have you on the show. We've been connected for quite some time. So you're a property developer. Can you give us a bit of an idea of the kind of projects that you do and how you got into property developing?
Yeah, sure. So I was working for some developers and builders for about 7 years, setting up a lot of underground infrastructure. And, was very curious about the industry, and then finally made the leap in 2013. Sort of started the business with my wife, Jessica. And we started off in a lot of sort of low to mid-spec townhouses, predominantly, in Melbourne's inner west. And then in more recent years, we sort of made a switch over to some architectural townhouses. Some of that stuff's more towards the inner east of Melbourne. And then, now we do a bit of a variety of everything. That's us. Yeah.
So how many projects would you say you've knocked over in that period of time?
Around about 15 or 16. Yeah.
All right. So you got a few projects under your belt?
Yeah, lots of learnings. Lots of headaches, but it's been fun. Yeah.
So most of it's been that sort of 3 or 4 unit site type of project?
Yeah, so we started with 3 units, very simple sort of single story stuff. Quickly kind of switched into the 4 units. Seemed to find that was just a good fit for us. It also seems to stack up financially a bit better than what a lot of the 3 unit sites we were seeing were. And it also just seems to be a good amount of risk. It's not too hard on the pre-sale requirements. There is still a little bit of flexibility on funding options. So we stayed a lot in that sort of 4 units and just replicated that for quite a while. We've done some larger stuff into sort of the 7 townhouses, but really like it in that space. Yeah, sort of 2 to 5 units. It just feels right.
And I think you've worked with joint venture partners or investment partners through all of those projects. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we started off just on our own initially, then quickly raised some debt partners in the first couple of years, and then of recent it's mainly all been equity partners, which is just a nice way, I think, to do business. Yeah.
And so what's the key differences between those two types of arrangements, the debt versus equity investors?
Look, for us, it's just nice to have the project stacked with more equity as opposed to sort of bank debt on top of debt from potential investors. There's obviously a lot of pressure on the time delivery with the debt partners as opposed to equity partners. Also sort of find the people that you come across that want to invest into projects with you, especially when it's equity, sort of seems to be that really long-term relationships that you can just kind of continue for the next sort of 10 years and just grow together. Where I find some of the stuff with the debt arrangements is just really transactional.
And so with the equity partners, they buy a stake or invest a stake into the entity that you do, and then they get a share of the profits at the end. Is that sort of how it works in the most simple form?
Yeah, that's right. We sort of found over the years that there seems to be a really good capital amount, from that $200,000 to sort of $350,000 mark. It's just an achievable amount for investors. So quite often, most of the projects we're looking at always seem to need around about $1 million of capital these days. So quite often we'll set that up with 3 or 4 investors across that. Project entity will be set up, and bank account, cash flow trackers, and then we'll see that through all the way to settlements, and then pay everyone out accordingly for their share. I just find it's a really nice, clean system. It's not too stressful for anyone, and there's a lot of people with that sort of barriers to entry to get into development that they may not have $1 million laying around, which is fair enough to sort of get into a project. So it just sort of seems to work on a couple of different fronts. Yeah.
And so are they people that are interested in getting into development themselves, or they're just more interested in investing into property in a more proactive way?
I'd say sort of maybe 30% of people that are somewhat interested in getting into development. And then maybe the 70% would be sort of people getting closer to retirement, just being a little bit more active. Don't want to just sort of rely on the speculation of capital growth and stuff that a lot of the baby boomers did for quite a while. It's a good balance. We're just really comfortable with those size projects.
And given that you've done so many of those sized projects now, what would you say some of the key lessons are that you've picked up along the way?
Justin, there's been quite a few, to be honest.
That's why, just give me the key ones.
Look, I think lessons, a lot of it I think comes down to research. I see a lot of stuff now where people will be looking at developing and they just find a couple of comps to sort of compare their prices. I find that, you really can't just be relying on real estate agents and so forth just to get your approximate sales. You need to be digging down into sort of 10 or 20 comps yourself, breaking that down into sales per square meter and so forth. Really analysing which product that is feasible and most importantly sellable is a really big one. Just anyone can sort of get together some sort of a feasibility, but the figures that you enter into it are just so important. And if you've done all the research yourself, then you can really sort of sleep well knowing that no. Like when I go and speak to an agent, you've already got some idea what they're going to tell you, and you can sort of say on the spot, yeah, this is correct, or no, they're inflating it, to get the site sold or whatever the reasons may be. I just find that research is just such a big part of what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've just put out a property developer training program, and in that I talk a lot about market research and the importance of understanding the sales in the local area when you're working on your feasibility. And it doesn't actually take that long to become something of an area expert when you're tracking all the sales in that area over a 3-4 month period. You can actually end up knowing more about the sales in the area than some of the agents that are working in that area.
I agree. Yeah, in 10 to 20 hours, once you've done it a few times, you can get it broken out pretty well. I think one of the other big learnings that we found is, running a project sort of more off of feasibility. We quickly learned that we had to switch to sort of feasibility and cash flow trackers, and that's just been an absolute godsend. It's very complicated when you're halfway through one project or multiple projects, about knowing what's been spent and at any point in time what that project's cost you. So you just got to get to that level of, yes, it's quite painful, and every project has a new entity, and every entity has a new bank account. And every bank account has a tracker, and it's all just managed. I think that's just takes so much stress out of it. Yeah.
How come you got to that point? Were you trying to manage multiple projects just using one bank account, or how were you having issues there, or what brought you to that realization?
It's a good question. We initially, I think, had about 2 projects running with one bank account. That wasn't too bad. But we sort of started with our 3-unit project that I mentioned, and we quickly jumped into having 4 projects running. Not under construction at the same time, but we basically just had to quickly switch to keep everything independent and insular. And another big thing that we learned is we used to sort of rely on top-ups for projects. We don't really do that anymore. If we are looking at a project and we think it needs $1.1 million worth of capital, we'll implement that at the start of the project. It's just so much safer, but it just takes a couple of years to sort of get to that understanding and that headspace, I guess.
Yeah, that is a point that I was making recently to someone just around a lesson, or when you're getting into developing, something to be aware of is having enough capital, being liquid for the whole project, because you don't want to get to a point in the project where you run out of cash, or you have to start scrambling around and you're desperate to find some money to be able to pay for things. That would be a very stressful scenario.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think, yes, it's good to be optimistic with timelines, but if you're doing cash flow projections, it's good to be the opposite. Just little things that you kind of learn along the way. Otherwise, you just cause yourself stress.
Yeah, well, you and I obviously have the same hairdresser and the same lessons that we've learnt thanks to the loss of hair along the way. So, we both look like property developers.
Yeah, thanks for
that. And can you tell me what you reckon you've learned about yourself along the way through property developing?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned is just the amount of resilience that you need to do property development. You're quite often faced with a lot of big decisions that you have to carefully consider. So for me personally, it's just important to really sort of take your time with things, be really conscious of things like your health and your stress levels and stuff, so that you can carefully think some of these decisions through. I don't like to rush many things, so from that angle, property development suits a bit, because it is a bit of a slow-moving beast. But yeah, definitely resilience is it's a big one, and I kind of like that. I like that it teaches us that. Teaches us patience. So there's some good characteristics in it.
I think one of the challenges that you face making decisions is that you don't have all the information available to you. You're trying to make your best decision based on the information that you have at hand, and sometimes it's not everything. You just have to make a call.
Yeah, yeah. Which a lot of people don't like to do these days. But again, I think it's a good thing to learn. You know, there's a great lot of lessons if you do it carefully. And you know, I think the other big thing that we sort of learned is just really keeping an eye on your downside of each stage for the projects. You know, if you pay attention to that and you do it in the right sequence, it just really de-risks the projects. You know, for example, if you're looking at, you purchased a piece of land, or you already own the piece of land, and you're considering sort of committing 25 grand to some town planning fees for architects and planners and so forth, and you're aware that, okay, when I spend this, my downside is 25,000, and you've gone out and you've confirmed that the upside may be an extra 100 grand on your land value, and you just go through it in those stages of like, yeah, let's progress to planning permit. Yep, okay, our sales are holding up strong, our build estimates are holding up strong, let's progress the building permit, and then so on, and just really watch your downside for each stage of the project. If you do that and you're staying in this sort of size projects, it's just very low risk, which ultimately is what we're about. Yeah,
it's a really good point, and it is actually quite easy to identify what some of those downsides and the risks are at the different stages of the project, and also what some of the mitigation steps or mitigation measures that you can put in place to help alleviate some of those risks.
Yeah, and like, you know, we tend to involve QS estimates early on now on our drawings. We're sort of doing our value management way earlier in our design process as opposed to just a tender stage. You know, so there's a lot of ways to sort of mitigate a lot of this stuff. But yeah, I like that about development. I like that you can just take a really staged approach to it. As long as you're not in too much of a rush for your capital back, it doesn't have to hold you up on your timeline much. You just have to implement it at the right points.
Yeah, well, you can see when they're coming, you know, when they're arriving. It's usually not a surprise. Just touching on your comment around value management. So what are the things that you're looking for when you enter into that value management phase?
Look, of recent, we've sort of been doing it in conjunction with, you know, two architects, one, you know, our preferred builder and so forth, and we'll do it all together across a couple of hours on each project. And just sort of considering, okay, yes, we've got this cladding spec, you know, at our first submission. Is this going to be right? How is this product doing? Like at the moment, we're dealing with the timber price increases. So, you know, a lot of it's dealing with, you know, external claddings. Internal spec, yes, but not so much at the earlier stages. We do tend to do that stuff later on. But just even looking at, okay, we've got first floor walls sitting over these long spans on the ground floor. You know, can we implement new walls? Can we do this? You know, just to sort of minimise a lot of our steel and so forth. And just being really cautious with our briefs to the architects. It does throw another level of complexity at it when you are trying to do architectural townhouses as opposed to some of the lower spec. But it also ends up in a good result. You know, you've got a project that you can be quite proud of. You enjoy driving past. It just does add a lot of layers to the value managing. Yeah.
And what's one of the highlights of a project that you've delivered in terms of something not going right or something being tricky, like a challenge that you faced in delivering a project that you could share with us that was a great learning opportunity for you?
Yeah. So in our earlier years, we had one of the builders probably past frame stage, not far off lock-up stage, just run out of money. Not as a result of our project. Our bank was on time with all the payments, but they just other projects they had running. And all of the trades just stopped turning up to the site. So that was a really fun one to deal with. You can only call their office and demand site meetings and so forth for so long. And it was quite interesting because, you go through that process and then you have to start getting some legal advice and you have to listen to some of the lawyers' opinions on how to tackle things. And, sometimes they can just be extremely black and white, in the contract and so forth, and issue this notice. That wasn't something that we were comfortable in doing. So we ended up, in the end, setting up a meeting with the builder. This was right before the lock-up payment was about to be due, which is such a critical part, as you know, as a developer. It's probably the one point of the project where the builders go from sort of, cash flow negative to cash flow positive, which ultimately is why a lot of the lawyers were sort of suggesting, that's the point where you would, consider ending a contract. And we just didn't want to do it. So we ended up renegotiating a bit of a retention agreement with the builder, which was great. And we negotiated paying some of the trades with like a loan agreement with the builder, and it worked, and we got the project completed. But that was probably one of our most stressful points in our earlier years. But it was good. I don't think a lot of people go in and deal with that stuff too well. So test you.
And what was the key takeout or lesson that you brought forward with you from there?
I think more just around just being outcome focused. Like I was saying, a lot of people just caught up in the black and white of options, but really just focusing on what we wanted, and that was the project to be built, completed, and they were all sold, and the buyers wanted to settle. So we were only going to consider a path that was going to deliver that result. So I think that was a good one.
Actually, didn't you have some issues on a recent build with your builder towards the end with some quality issues or something else that's happened?
Earlier last year, we had a builder building a 7-unit project for us. This was in between a lot of the early stage lockdowns. And again, a couple of trades weren't turning up to finish it. So we got them to agree that we could have some of our own trades come on site and complete it. And again, that's got us over the line. So, builders have definitely contributed to some of my hair loss, Justin. That's for sure.
Well, I was about to ask you a question about any advice that you'd have for people out there who are maybe looking for a builder, or how do you go about finding a good builder to partner with on a project?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. I tend to lean on you a lot for that one, Justin, and check who you're building with currently. That's been one of the more recent ones. But look, where we start, we tend to go to a lot of our building inspectors and ask them for feedback on who's turning up, the least amount of defects, and so forth. It's something more commercial. We go to a lot of the QSs and ask them who's building on time, stuff like that. And then thirdly, the banks tend to have a bit of a list of builders that they like or dislike to work with. So I think all three of those avenues are pretty good. Even surprisingly, real estate agents tend to have a pretty good idea on who's delivering quality stuff, because I've got a lot of good relationships with real estate agents, and they don't like to be doing final walkthroughs and settlements with any issues. So they're actually really good when it comes to that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that local real estate agents are a really good option in terms of having some insight into who the good and the not so good builders are in their local patch, for those exact reasons that you just said. They don't like to have walkthroughs with poor quality buildings that they've got to hand over.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that we've seen with builders over the years is they just tend to go through these cycles where, they will build one project for us and they'll do an incredible job. And then the second year will come along and they may have too much in their pipeline on that year, and there's a bit less supervision going on. And so it's really dependent on where in the cycle they are, whether they've got the right amount of staff under them, or, front of office or admin. I respect it's a very hard game building, especially in a lot of this residential market. I give credit where it's due. It's not an easy thing.
Oh, it's a good point, actually. There's just so much regulation that builders have to comply with, and so many moving parts. It's, I wouldn't want to be a builder.
Yeah, not to mention you're dealing with sort of 24 to 26 trades, roughly, on these kind of townhouses. And, that's sort of 24 to 26 personalities and business owners, and it's probably like managing 26 children.
Yeah, well, I often think that when I'm wandering around on site, and you go, wow, look at all the people that are working here on my project. Carpenters, painters. It's pretty amazing sometimes to think that your efforts and your vision is contributing to these people being on site. But yeah, it's a lot of different people. I'm certainly glad I only have to coordinate with the builder to get stuff done.
Yeah, no, it sure is.
And if you could go back and change one thing about your developing career, what do you think it would be?
I think ultimately I'd probably take it a little bit slower, I did jump into my first sort of 4 or 5 projects pretty fast. So I would just take a bit more time with it. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Most people say they wish they'd gone a bit quicker.
Yes, I see that too. But no, that's definitely my take. Just enjoy it. Like I said, I think it's a really good industry. Done in the right way, you can mitigate a lot of risk with upside. But yeah, just take your time with it and make your decisions very carefully.
So how come you think you got into it a bit too quick? You were doing your first 2 projects, or first 5 projects too quickly. What were you worried about, or what issues did you face?
I think just a lot of the initial teething issues that you get into when you get into developments. Trying to find a builder that could handle that initial capacity with us and grow at the same time. That gave us a lot of headaches in the earlier days. When we started, funding was very easy, which was good. The market was very easy, so sales was always really good. We weren't dealing with a lot of these issues that we're dealing with now with construction cost increases quite as fast. But still, I think, when you start off, you've got to sort of have a really good financial understanding of your feasibilities, of your trackers, and equity and debt and all of these really important terms, which you don't necessarily have on your first 1, 2, 3 projects. So I think it's an important thing. We were really lucky in the sense that our projects have all been very profitable. They've also all been very accurate compared to our initial feasibilities, which has been nice. But not everyone's that fortunate. If you get into take on 3 or 4 projects and you're not making good profits, then yeah, you can run into some cash flow problems pretty fast. But still, just take your time, enjoy it. Yeah, I think it's a really great option for people, whether they're employed and they're just looking to build equity in the background, across a 2 or 3 year period. I think it's a great avenue.
Yeah, and it's definitely a skill that once you've got, it's like riding the bike, isn't it? You could do a project on the side every 2-3 years, bring in a couple of extra 100K if that's what you're interested in and continue on with your day job, sort of a bit of a hobby.
Yeah, and like if you're not selling down your projects, there's just a huge amount of savings in the feasibility for you. You know, the average amount of sales GST that we're seeing on these such projects is like 180,000. Not to mention, you know, agents' commissions of 60,000, and you're like, okay, if you know that's before you even get to income tax. So you know you're probably giving away sort of 20% of your project by selling it down for turnover and so forth. So if you've already got a great employment or wage or so forth, then you're literally sort of, you know, developing and you're acquiring these assets at a wholesale rate. And just, if you do that slowly, it's just a really good way to build your wealth without a lot of stress. And I think a lot of the stress comes from if you're doing it slowly and you're not relying on it for your turnover, then it gives you some flexibility, right? So we've seen recently, you know, 2018 was a pretty hard year to sell in. I remember both me and you were going through it at the same time. If you're just sort of doing one and you've got your job on the side, it's no big deal to sort of hold that project for an extra year and extend your firm out. So there's just so many advantages to doing it that way for people that are sort of set up within their jobs. I think where people see the big jump is when they're making that switch from their job to developing full time. It takes a lot of sort of thought of how you're going to make that leap and you know, have borrowing power, and you know, or do you joint venture with people that have borrowing power and raise equity, or that's when it gets a little bit more complex. But if you are working and you're just investing on the side, very, very simple.
Yeah, you're just always looking for the capital. That's the name of the game with developing, isn't it?
Yeah, especially with the current lending requirements. I mean, the good thing is now it looks like there's some signs that the big four banks are really getting back into the construction market, which is nice to see. They've really been sitting on the sidelines since probably about 2016 that I recall. And, you know, a lot of these sort of private players have been stepping in, but there's been such a huge gap between the bank funding rates of 4 to 5% to some of these second tier players at, you know, 9 to 11%. Really surprised that not too many people jumped in the middle there, but yeah, it's very welcome to see the big four stepping back in with rates being as low as they are. I mean, no one's getting funding quite as cheap as what they are. And, you know, with low interest rates in the market, looks pretty stable for the time being. So it's a good time actually to sort of be getting into development. How long for? No one knows. But yeah,
it's probably a good sign that the banks are looking to get back in, because they've got way better analysts than you or me have access to, and way better data. So would indicate to me that they're feeling pretty comfortable about where the property market is headed over the next 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, they were quite hesitant in 16 because they were just concerned that, you know, if things slow down or there was too many investors in the market or overseas purchases, then they're not going to be able to sell their assets as quick as they would like. With clearance rates rising, you know, they know that they can get out of these properties if they have to, so they're very comfortable.
Well, let's hope they're right and things go from strength to strength in property over the coming years. Tell me, Matthew, what's your top tip for developers out there who are looking to take their business to the next level?
Look, I think it's probably two things. Do not try and develop, you know, with just the feasibility. Make sure you have your feasibility and cash flow trackers established from the start. And the second biggest tip that I probably ever got was just when you're doing your site acquisition and you've finished your DD, and when I say finished your DD, I mean that you've looked into all the services and easements and so forth, and the town planner's done a review on the site, your architect's reviewed a land use plan for you, you've got a bit of a prelim build on it, you've got some sales comps on it, and you can kind of end up with your end sort of GRV on the side, then just really make sure you're not pushing that 30 to 33% of your end value on your site acquisition. And the reason I say this is it doesn't sound much, and over the years we've seen it, we've played around with this a little bit, but it's just such an important KPI to keep an eye on during your site acquisitions. It just makes the whole process so much easier if the feasibility's got the right shape. And that's, I've kind of learned that, within these feasibilities, you can kind of see, my build allowance is working with the shape of my feasibility. My land is also working, and everything just kind of comes along nicely. Whereas if you sort of force one area too hard, then you're trying to get your build down too low to deliver on the right margin. And if you try and force anything, things can break. So it's just such a critical first step. Yeah.
I think at the moment, if you were trying to push your build rates down to make a project work, you're going to get into big trouble.
It's a very good point. Yeah.
And you mentioned cash flow tracker before. Is that just like a software, an accounting type software like Xero, or is it something else?
Look, you can definitely do it through some of these software programs. We do it just through Excel. But yeah, it's basically, you have your project bank account set up, you have your feasibility and all of your allowances set up within the Xero. And then at the end of every month, as you reconcile your Xero, you can really sort of see, okay, this is exactly what we spent next to our allowances within our feasibility. And then the trackers will forecast it out into the months that those funds are required, based off the timeline of your project. And it's just a really organised way to sort of run it. And the reason for that is when you're doing your feasibility and your trackers at the start, you can see, okay, this project needs 600,000 for the first year, 400,000 for year two, in simplified terms. And if I do that, then I'm running with a 50 or 100 grand surplus on that project. And it just kind of, it just gives you transparency into not just your profit and loss, but also into your balance sheet and what the funds are going to do at the end of that project, whether that's going to increase equity or be paid back to investors or so forth. I just couldn't recommend it enough. Yeah.
Oh, very good. And then what would you say is the biggest trap that you see developers falling into, or that they can fall into?
Probably the biggest thing that I see is just a lot of planning permits. Like, people will go through the process and spend 12 or 18 months getting planning permits to projects that just don't make sense. So quite often it may be that the feasibility is off. But not just that, we all know that feasibilities can all move around quite a lot through the life of the project. But more importantly, that they've gone and designed a project that is not what the market wants. And there's just nothing really worse than that, because you might have spent 18 months getting through to that stage, and then you're going to market and things aren't selling. So you just got to be really cautious with, when you're doing your research from the start, that you are having a good look at okay, in this area, if we're talking about townhouses, this product makes sense. How many days on the market was that? Or speaking to your local agents and saying, look, which product has sold the best for you? And normally agents are pretty good at that, because they ultimately want their job to sort of be easy. And, I think a lot of them also want to be part of developments that are a little bit nicer, and not just your typical cookie cutter approach. So I think, it's just so important to involve everyone from that early stage and just make sure it's a good product. Yeah.
Yeah, it does come back to that early research where you're looking at sales, because you can have a good look at the floor plans and analyze them, look at them. What is it that was attractive to the buyers? Was it a bigger kitchen? Was it a bigger bathroom? How did it work? Was the master massive and the other bedrooms not so big? And just doesn't take that long to get a bit of a feel for what seems to be attractive and work in the local market.
Yeah, and like a big thing that we learn is a lot of people are always comparing it back to sort of median house price in the area. So, people have got the option, and you've got a product that's at 700,000, and you can buy an existing house in that area that is in not bad shape for 700,000. Sometimes you're just running it too close. People like to see quite a bit of a saving, sometimes going for the townhouse product over the house price. And it obviously changes. We've been doing a lot of research in Hawthorne East lately. And yeah, a lot of people are willing to take a townhouse that is high architectural spec, but they want to pay 1.4 for it. A lot of the average house prices in there are 2.5. So there's families that just can't afford that 2.5 that want to be in the area for schools. There's downsizers that they want to cash in and set themselves up, and so there's just different criteria for different suburbs. So when you're doing your research, really getting a map and sort of breaking it up into 4 different pockets within that suburb is also quite important, because that does change a lot.
Yeah, it's true. There can definitely be different pockets within suburbs. One side of a road can be different to the other side of the road.
Yeah, I mean, look, where I started was where I grew up. A lot of our projects were in Brooklyn, West Footscray. So for me, I grew up in these streets, so I knew them really well. And I did find like you just sleep very well at night when you were in your own area. Yeah. You start venturing out into different suburbs. It's a different level of research that you need to get into. So yeah, I do find a lot of people tend to be more comfortable either in their own area or somewhere that they've looked into very carefully.
Oh, so coming from west of Melbourne, does that mean you're a Bulldog supporter?
My whole family is. That's correct.
Well, we've got the grand final this weekend featuring the Bulldogs.
It is. I was predominantly into basketball growing up, so I was a bit of an outsider. But yeah, everyone's very excited for this weekend.
That's okay. I'm sure they'll let you into the doghouse this weekend to join the team.
Assuming Melbourne keeps it all together.
So tell me, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Look, I think it really probably comes down to that land acquisition. Yeah, just really keep an eye on that percentage. It's a really good, simple rule to stick to. Yeah.
Very good. Well, Matthew, if people want to find out more about you, where should they head to?
Yep, that's a good question. So Chamberlain Property is our website. They're welcome to contact me via my email. I can give that to you after the show. But yeah, they're the 2 places.
Fantastic. Well, it's been awesome to have you on the show at last. I really appreciate you sharing some of your insights and wish you best for the upcoming projects.
No worries. Thanks, Justin. Appreciate your time.
Good to talk to you, Matthew. See you later. There we go, mate. You survived.
Whew. How do you do this?
What's that?
How do you do this for a job? You get used to it.